Okay, welcome. The discussion of early modern philosophy continues. Today, we're going to be looking at Hume and one of his famous arguments about the nature of our belief in cause and effect relationships. So here's the plan for today. We're going to get a distinction between relations of ideas versus matters of fact on the table. We're going to look at how Hume analyzes our belief in causes and effects. He's going to say it's not experiential, nor is it demonstrative or intuitive. And then we're going to look at Hume's, what I'm going to call the custom and habit hypothesis. And this is going to lead us to two interesting theses that we'll find in Hume. One we could call doxastic involuntarism, so I'll explain that concept. And we'll also look at how Hume could be considered a proto-Darwinian thinker. Hume comes about 100 years before Darwin, but in certain ways there are ideas of Darwin's that Hume kind of anticipates in a very interesting way. So lots to cover today. Now, here's the first important thing to know about, and this is the relationship between relations of ideas and matters of fact. So last time around we learned about Hume's idea of what he calls the copy principle. The copy principle plays a hugely important role in Hume's enquiry and his overall epistemology and metaphysics. Perhaps second, or in like a tie for first, the other important idea you need to understand and think like Hume is this contrast between a relation of ideas versus matters of fact. So basically, the way that Hume is thinking about it is that everything that you know, all human knowledge, can be sort of grouped into one of two categories: the relation of ideas versus matter of fact categories. And here's some examples, right? So we might say here are some examples of relations of ideas. We might say geometry or algebra, arithmetic or the Pythagorean theorem. So for instance, we might say that, look, for instance, that with a right triangle, here's like a simple fact about triangles. This isn't a perfectly drawn triangle, but we might say if this represented a triangle, we might say that for this right triangle, this has to be the largest angle. This 90-degree angle has to be the largest angle. And the edge opposite this corner has to be the longest edge of the triangle. This is a bit of knowledge that you might have, right? Here's another bit of knowledge. So the example on the slide says that there is a dog in my house. In this case, I'm at my office, and I've got a dog on the sofa with me. And we might say, that's a thing that I know, and I know it by experience. I don't know it in the same way that I know these things about triangles. And what might we say about my knowledge of triangles? Well, one thing that we can say is when I know it to be true about triangles, I know it about triangles not just now, but for all time. Whereas, sometimes it's the case that the dog is in my house. Sometimes it's the case, like today, that the dog is with me in my office. Right? We can also say that relations of ideas are intuitively or demonstratively certain. So when we're talking about intuitive knowledge, we are talking about things that by thinking about a concept, you can see that they just have to be true. You might have a certain insight about the relationship between certain angles and certain edges of triangles. When we're talking about demonstrative certainties, Well, there we're thinking about things that you know where you can lay out a step-by-step proof, right? So I could give you a step-by-step proof, for instance, that when you're dealing with a right angle in the triangle, well, you couldn't have a second angle of the same or greater sides, because then you wouldn't be able to close the triangle's edges, right? You'd need to get a fourth or more sides in there in order to close the figure, right? So we might say that, like, look, we could give a demonstration that if there's a right angle in a triangle, that has to be the largest angle of the triangle, right? It's a step-by-step proof. Intuition, it's sort of like an insight that you see about a concept, about something that has to be true about it. A demonstration is a step-by-step proof. And here's the thought. You can know things about triangles, both intuitively and demonstratively. When it comes to the location of my dog, right? When it comes to the location of my dog, I can't give any proofs. Like, I couldn't go over to the whiteboard over here and, give you a mathematical theorem about the location of my dog. Instead, what I do is I just look, or I pat the dog that is sitting here on the sofa at my hip, and we say, look, that is knowledge that we have, but we're not doing it demonstratively. We're going to do it through experience, right? So it's by using my eyes and my ears and my sense of touch that I know where my dog is. And in a certain way, we might say that your knowledge about triangles, maybe it's guided along by your senses, but ultimately, once you learn certain proofs about triangles, you don't need any experience, so it's sort of irrelevant to the justification of the claim. Moreover, no experience that you could possibly have could undercut your belief later, right? So for instance, once you learn that the right angle has to be the largest angle within a triangle, you're never going to stop believing that. But if I had certain new experiences, like if I see my dog later at some point in my backyard rather than in my office, well, that gives me a new experience. And we might say in this way, matters of fact, you don't know them intuitively or demonstratively. It's not a proof. You learn it through experience. And in a certain way, we might say, well, this is because matters of fact are matters of the way that the world is. Given that the world is a certain way, is going to determine whether or not it's true that my dog is in my office. We could also give other examples. So the other example that we could think of, and this is kind of Hume's famous one, that the sun will rise tomorrow, right? Well, whether or not that statement is true depends on, well, how certain events play out in the future. A relation of ideas is not like this. We might say it's true that the largest angle of a triangle is opposite its largest side. That's true even if there are no real triangles in nature, right? Everything is not a perfect Euclidean figure. Well, we might say that it's still a truth about the concept of triangles. And when we start thinking about geometry and algebra and arithmetic, we're noticing that these are claims that are true no matter what way the world turns out. So whatever the facts on the ground in the universe are, conceptual truths will always remain true. Now, in this sense, Hume is going to tell us that the contrary is unintelligible. So not only have you never seen a triangle with two right angles, but trying to think about a triangle with two right angles is actually incoherent, right? So we would say that you are trying to think of a contradiction, right? So we would say that the fact that it's conceptually impossible, it's a contradiction in and of itself, to imagine a triangle with two right angles? Well, we're going to say that that is incoherent, and it's basically knowledge that we can get to by applying the principle of non-contradiction. A thing cannot both be and not be at the same time. Think about the fact, though, that for matters of fact, things that you learn through experience, well, part of why you're using experience to figure these things out is because the contrary of these claims is, in fact, intelligible. So the reason why I use experience to figure out where my dog is because if I don't rely on experience, I'm going to have to realize, like, look, there are many possibilities about my dog's location. So it's not a conceptual truth that the dog is in the office or is in the backyard or is or isn't on the sofa. Now, here's the really interesting and important move. Hume is going to say, think about the claim that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. Well, part of how we know that, or how we trust our senses at all, really, is that we believe that there is a cause and effect relationship between the way the world is and how our senses are functioning. Right? So, as Hume puts it, at 786 in the Shapiro and Lascano volume, he's going to say, all reasonings concerning matter of fact seem to be founded on the relation of cause and effect. Everything that depends on experience, we're going to have a background assumption that there is a cause and effect relationship between the way the world is and how our experiences represent it. As Hume says, by means of that relation alone can we go beyond the evidence of our memory and our senses. We wouldn't be able to get outside of our own heads if we didn't believe in cause and effect relationships. Because if we didn't believe in cause and effect, well, then how would we know what our senses are trying to tell us at all? So Hume points out that when you move your way through the world, you are reasoning according to cause and effect all the time. So for instance, maybe you find a watch on a desert island. You are walking through this uninhabited land, and you find a wristwatch on the beach. Well, Hume says that should give you pretty good evidence that other people have been here before. And we might say, look, the presence of a wristwatch is a certain kind of effect. And we can make certain inferences about that effect, that they had certain causes. So the idea here is that you start with your senses, they indicate a real world to you, and then that real world, the features of it, give us a license, apparently, to infer certain causes of the features that we're directly observing. So, cause and effect reasoning is ubiquitous. Here's another one. You hear a friend's voice in a darkened room, and you infer that your friend is there. We might think you observe an effect, you then infer a cause behind that effect. So, we might say, like, look, we do this all the time, but we might also realize, like, look, if we look at relations of ideas versus matters of fact, we should notice that it is at least intelligible and conceivable that, things don't act according to cause and effect, right? That, starting tomorrow, things are going to fall up. That doesn't seem likely, and I don't think you actually believe it. Neither does Hume. But we're going to say, like, look, in this way that at least we can imagine it coherently, we're going to say that our belief in cause and effect relationships is a matter of fact, right? But here's the funny thing. Whereas it seems straightforward to say that I can observe my dog on the sofa, directly by experience, we should notice that cause and effect doesn't seem to be something that we can read directly off of our experiences. Here's a claim that Hume makes. He says, Adam, we're imagining the first man, first book of Genesis, right? Through his rational faculties, or I should say, though his rational faculties are supposed entirely perfect at the very first, he could not have inferred the fluidity and transparency of water. From that, he couldn't infer that these features of water show that water would suffocate him. So we should notice that, look, there is a fact about water that you cannot breathe in it. Just by looking at water, you can't tell that right away. Air is also fluid and transparent, but that does the opposite of suffocate us, right? And we might say that there are a whole bunch of things where we can observe them in all their features and all their glory, but we cannot observe what they will do in certain causal relationships. Here's one other fun example. Maybe your high school chemistry teacher showed you this, like mine did for me. Thankfully, only in video. But if you take a piece of pure, is it copper? No. Pure sodium. Funny enough, sodium as a pure element almost has a waxy texture to it, or like a little piece of clay. Now, if you cut off a piece of pure sodium and drop it into water, well, if you don't know the answer, you might imagine, it would probably sink like a metal. Isn't that what metals do? Sodium is a kind of metal. Now, the funny thing is that pure sodium is incredibly reactive. And if you drop a piece of pure sodium into a glass of water, it will fizz and pop and even sometimes create fire spontaneously, right? You can't know that cracking and popping and setting a flame is built into the nature of pure sodium, right? So Hume's point is that, look, the effect is totally different from the cause, right? So the effect of fizzing, popping, and flames is separate from, a little waxy piece of pure sodium. And just by observing all the features of pure sodium, it might not be obvious that it's going to react with water in a certain way. We might even say, look, you can't observe billiard balls in their first state before there's any contact and make an obvious inference about what event will happen next. So, cause and effect, you don't read it straight off of experience, and you don't know it demonstratively or intuitively. So we're going to notice that, look, that the future will resemble the past is a matter of fact. We could imagine it being otherwise. But if you know something via matters of fact, you can't know it as a matter of demonstration, intuition, or through the operation of the understanding. Hume is going to think about the operation of the understanding as like the use of pure reason. And in this way, he's going to say, you can't know something for sure if it can't be intuited or demonstrated. So, we actually don't know that the future absolutely for sure is going to resemble the past. As we might say, look, you've seen the sunrise every day, every morning, as long as you've existed. Maybe one exception, so long as you don't live above the Arctic Circle. And given that you've had this regular experience, you might think that it's going to rise tomorrow, but we might say, look, you don't know it for sure, right? Right. So maybe what this conclusion should say is at least you can't know for sure that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. You don't know it as an absolute proof. So Hume is going to point out, to endeavor the proof of the supposition that the future will resemble the past by probable arguments, right? By saying, well, it rose all these other days, so that seems to give us a really high probability that it's going to rise tomorrow. Well, notice that because cause and effect is itself something that we might recognize to be a matter of fact and put under rational scrutiny, he's going to say that in a certain way, you're arguing in a circle. You're taking for granted the point which is in question. Right? So there's a certain way in which you cannot give a proof that the future will resemble the past by giving experience. And we might also notice that there is a certain circularity of the argument. So here's a little chart I've made. Here's a matter of fact that you might believe, right? And maybe it's that the sun will rise tomorrow. And how are you going to justify that? Well, you might say, look, the sun rose yesterday, and it rose the day before that, and it rose the day before that, all my life. And also, we can look at history books, and in the history books, there has never been any documentation of a day in which the sun did not rise. So there have been thousands upon thousands of sunrises. Looks like we have a regularity of the universe, right? But we're going to say, like, look, we're making the assumption that the universe behaves according to regular principles of cause and effect. So ultimately, one of the justifications for your particular belief about the sun rising tomorrow is a claim about this general idea that the future will resemble the past. One way we could put it is, well, there have been futures in the past, right? Today was the future yesterday, right? So we could talk about today now that it's the present. It is a past future, right? It was the future once. It no longer is. It's a past future. But now we're asking the question, will future futures be like past futures? And we might say, well, that's how cause and effect is supposed to work. Here's where it gets tricky. Hume is going to ask, where do you get your beliefs about cause and effect? Well, you would say, I've lived my life long enough, and I've noticed that through experience, regularity has presented itself to me. So you might say that the reason you think that future futures will resemble past futures is based on experience. But why do you trust your experience? Well, experience makes sense, and it is trustworthy so long as you are supposing that the future will be like the past, right? But the supposition that the future will be like the past is justified by a belief that there are regular laws of nature that are governing everything. So when Hume tells us that to argue that the future will resemble the past through probability or arguments about existence or going back to your experience, this is what Hume is saying about we're arguing in a circle. You have to believe in the regularity of the universe in order to prove it. But that's what philosophers call begging the question. So this is how we get to this idea that, look, at some level, you can never really be certain, just on the basis of experience, that the future will be like the past. And in a certain way, experience cannot justify itself. So, that's the challenge, the problem that Hume gives us concerning cause and effect. You have to assume it in order to trust experience or know anything about the future. When you try to prove that very foundational principle itself, you can only find yourself, at least within Hume's framework, arguing in a circle. So that's basically what Hume gets up to in Chapter 4 of the Enquiry Concerning Human Understanding. As he moves on to Chapter 5, he's going to say, well, if you don't know cause and effect relationships by reason or demonstration, and there's a certain circularity to appealing to experience, Chapter 5, Hume is going to tell us that cause and effect is known by what he calls custom or habit. So, what explains why we believe that causes necessitate their effects? Well, Hume says that this is based on custom or habit. Now, some people might say, what does custom mean and what does habit mean? I would guess that we can think about custom and habit using what grammarians might call the appositive or. Right? When we talk about the appositive or, we're saying, here's an example, Joe Biden or the President of the United States of America. Now, in a certain way, that sounds like I'm talking about two people. But in other senses, we might say, like, look, when I say Joe Biden, or in other words, the President of the United States of America, I'm saying these are two ways of talking about the same thing. So when we talk about custom or habit, Hume is basically talking about what people always do, or what people are experientially, habitually trained to do. So, as he puts it, for wherever the repetition of any particular act or operation produces a propensity to renew the same act or operation, without being impelled by any reasoning or process of the understanding, we say this propensity is the effect of custom. We could even say that to do this kind of thing is to rely on habit. So think about all the ways in which you are able to rely on custom or habit in your daily life. Now, why is it that you believe when you turn the keys in your car that the engine is going to start? Well, it's not like you're going to look under the hood and check all the wiring every single time. Rather, you assume that because it's worked in the past and because you don't have any reason to think that the functioning of your car has changed, it's going to function in the same way again. Right? So this is the way in which people tend to infer and believe things, not in a logical or conscious way, not through a reasoning process of the understanding, Hume says, but instead we're using custom. So that's going to give us an answer to the question of why we believe that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. It's not like we have a proof in our head. It's not like we have the perfect piece of evidence because we only have information about the past. We have no sense experience of the future. Right? But we have habit to get us across this philosophical difficulty. Right? Our mind carries us beyond what we sense. And Hume also points out that our customary beliefs in certain ways that the universe is going to be, these are not under our voluntary control. He points out, for instance, that it is not in our power to believe that a mythical creature actually exists. Maybe some people have believed in centaurs at some point, but Hume says it's not in our power to believe that a centaur has ever really existed. So in this way, Hume is pointing out, like, look, there are certain things that you can't just believe at will. What is it to believe something? Well, to believe is to have certain experiences that are of a particularly vivid, lively, forceful, firm, and steady conception. So in this way, when you see something very vividly, you don't make a further decision to then believe what your senses are telling you. In this way, Hume could buy into the claim that to see is to believe, right? It's to have a certain conviction, not even intellectually, but emotionally, right? So believing that a certain thing is true is to have a certain irresistible representation of that thing. So, for instance, my belief that centaurs do not exist, we might say, is vivid and forcible and firm and steady in my mind. So this actually gets us to a really interesting philosophical view. Hume is basically saying that we have no decision over what we believe. Belief isn't something you decide to have or not to have. It's more so like something that happens to you. So you're going to believe that the sun is going to rise tomorrow in the same way that you're going to digest food. And insofar as your metabolism is going to function, it's just a thing that human beings do, and it's not something you decide to do. Contrast this with Descartes' view, right? Descartes claimed the will has this capacity to affirm or shun propositions, and the will is infinite insofar as it's indifferent. Each act could be done or not be done. Well, Hume will have none of this, right? So Hume is going to say that the will is perhaps just a way that human beings with human minds function. It's to have certain desires and certain values that they act on. But insofar as you have a will, well, that doesn't mean that you can just decide to believe in centaurs, or that you can decide to stop believing in everything that your senses tell you. In fact, Hume suggests that as a doxastic involuntarist, it's not really up to us. Your belief in cause and effect will just happen to you. And in this way, what we do when we sense and experience the world is much less rationalistic than other philosophers would have us believe. Rather, we should understand why people believe what they believe, why the way that people think like they think is, custom and habit. It's much more of an animal process than a rational process. So here's an example of how cause and effect thinking is supposed to be customary. Hume says, when I throw a dry piece of wood into the fire, my mind is immediately carried to conceive that it augments, like adds to, rather than extinguishes the flame. This transition of thought from the cause to the effect is not a matter of reason. It derives its origin altogether from custom and experience. So, why is it that you believe that wood will add to a fire? Well, it's because you've seen dry wood added to fires many times, and now your mind is just prepared, it's primed, it's ready to accept that future futures will be like past futures. Now, here's one last thing that we'll finish with. Hume says it's a good thing that you are not figuring out whether the future will be like the past according to reason. In fact, that would be wildly inefficient. Instead, Hume says this. Here, in our cause and effect thinking through custom, there is a pre-established harmony between the course of nature and the succession of our ideas. So he seems to be saying, like, look, there is, we can suppose, I suppose, a certain way that the world is, and there is a certain way that our mind moves. That is, there are certain inferences that people make. And these things move in harmony, right? So, for instance, our minds are prone to be prepared for dangerous things in a certain way, that we move away from them, right? We should also notice that this idea of pre-established harmony, this is a concept that appeared in Leibniz. So Hume is being a little cheeky. He's having a little fun here, right? And he's saying, like, look, we can say that there isn't a rational proof that the way we think actually corresponds with the laws of nature. But insofar as there is a correspondence, well, he says, though the powers and forces by which the former is governed are wholly unknown to us, that is, we don't actually have access to the laws of nature. He says, yet our thoughts and conceptions have still, we find, gone on in the same train with other works of nature. Custom is that principle by which our correspondence has been affected. Now here's where it gets Darwinian. He says, custom is so necessary to the subsistence of our species and the regulation of our conduct in every occurrence of human life. So, if we didn't form cause and effect beliefs through custom, well, then we would probably die, right? Because if you genuinely believed that eating a handful of nails was just as likely to nourish you as a piece of pizza, or if you didn't form the belief that pizza nourishes after being nourished by pizza so many times, well, that would not be good for the subsistence of our species, right? So our species does not subsist. It could not keep on surviving if it did not have certain cause and effect beliefs. And this subsistence-based explanation of where we get our cause and effect beliefs is going to sort of be a precursor to the Darwinian theory of natural selection. The idea that certain ways of being are going to help you stay in existence and pass on your genes. We can note, interestingly, that Darwin did in fact read Hume and read Hume with interest. So it's not without merit to at least hypothesize that Hume's thinking might have helped Darwin bring his ideas into sharper focus. So yeah, it's a good thing, according to Hume, that our beliefs are not based on reason, and that we do base our beliefs, we do explain our beliefs according to custom and habit. If we had to prove everything, well, we wouldn't get very far and we wouldn't survive. And nature gives us certain capacities and it gives us certain habits that work for us, even if we don't fully understand those capacities and habits. And in this way, Hume gives us not only an interesting theory of how people work, but also an interesting epistemological view. He's basically saying that it might be a good thing, it might even be an accurate thing to infer that the future will be like the past. But in terms of being able to give a rational proof that the future will be like the past, that might be impossible for us. And whether it's a good thing that we are governed by things that we can't prove, whether that's good news might be a matter of your own particular philosophical temperament. So I'll leave that for you to reflect on. But thanks for following me on this journey with Hume's discussion of cause and effect. And we'll continue things next time with Chapter 7 and Hume's discussion of what it is to think about a necessary connection. Because now that we've realized we don't have deep insight into cause and effect, Hume is going to need a better theory of the necessary connection. So I hope you'll join me for that one next time. Thanks for joining me today. Take care.